Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a Diablo 4 Sorcerer build guide. This guide will be for the Ball Lightning Sorcerer, a super fun build that got a massive buff with the latest patch 1.1.1 that just hit yesterday. Patch 1.1.1 helped sorcerers a lot, one of the underperforming classes in the big picture. And while we're not seeing a major shakeup in the sorcerer meta, yes, Blizzard still will be the best sorcerer build. According to sorcerer expert Northwar, Ball Lightning was the big winner for sorcerers this patch. This build got about a 40% increase in power. And if you don't want to be a meta slave, this is the best non-cold sorcerer build that you can run. It's the best lightning sorcerer build you can run, and it's just tons of fun. I mean, look at them balls of lightning zip around. This build is highly mobile, it's pretty tanky, and it has very good single target DPS. So in this video, we're going to go over the skills you want to use, the skill tree setup, your gear progression, your Paragon boards, everything that you need to rock this build. So let's start with our core skill setup. We're going to be rocking Ball Lightning. This is our main damage dealer. Normally this makes a slow moving ball of lightning shoot out, but with this build we're using the gravitational aspect, and that makes Ball Lightning orbit around you, which is the major game changer. This is necessary. This is a mandatory aspect for this build, and this is the aspect that got a major buff. We'll talk a bit more about it in a bit. Next we're going to take Teleport. This is our mobility skill, and it also breaks us out of crowd control. And as we all know, you get crowd controlled a lot in this game. Next we're taking Frost Nova. Not only is this a crowd control, but with the Mystical Frost Nova upgrade, it makes enemies vulnerable. This is pretty much a mandatory skill across all sorcerer builds because vulnerable is such an important source of damage, and Frost Nova, Mystical Frost Nova, is our only consistent way of triggering it. Then we're taking two defensives. Ice Armor, which gives us a huge amount of barrier, and Flame Shield, which makes us temporarily immune to all damage. It's also a crowd control break. And we're taking the Shimmering Flame Shield upgrade so that it's also a sizable potion, restoring 50% of your health. Now for our ultimate, we're taking Unstable Currents. This is going to do two things. First off, with the Prime Unstable Currents upgrade, you're dealing 25% increased attack speed. So you're going to be able to spam your Ball Lightning super fast. Second, whenever you cast a shock skill, i.e. Ball Lightning, you're going to randomly cast another core, conjuration, or mastery shock skill. Guess what? The only one on your skill bar is Ball Lightning, so that means every Ball Lightning you cast will be 2 for 1. So those are the core skills, and that's your basic rotation. You got Ball Lightning as your damage dealer, you're going to teleport around in order to immobilize, you're going to Frost Nova enemies before you want to deal your big damage to them, you're popping Ice Armor and Flame Shield when you need them. They're 20-second cooldown, so don't just pop them willy-nilly. Then Unstable Currents, that's your ultimate, you're going to save that for when you want big damage. Alright, now I'll go over exactly what you want to take on the skill tree. For basic, we're getting Arc Lash and Enhanced Arc Lash. We just need to put in 2 points to move along the skill tree. And there might be some usage cases when you might use Arc Lash. We'll talk about that a bit later. But then under core skills, you're not taking anything other than passives. 2 points Devastation to increase your mana, and then Elemental Dominance so that our Ball Lightning will deal more damage when cast at above 50 mana. That gets us to the defensive skills where we're dropping a bunch of skill points here. Flame Shield, Enhanced Flame Shield, Shimmering Flame Shield, Teleport, Enhanced Teleport, Shimmering Teleport. With Enhanced Teleport, the cooldown on Teleport is reduced by half a second per enemy hit, so you kind of do want to teleport into enemies. You want to ideally be able to use Teleport as an engage tool. Why? Because with Shimmering Teleport, we're also gaining 30% damage reduction. Ice Armor, Enhanced Ice Armor, this is going to give us a little bit of mana regen. Then we're putting 5 points into Frost Nova. Every point invested reduces the cooldown on Frost Nova. We need to be popping this. Again, vulnerable is such an important part of our damage. To that effect, we're taking Enhanced Frost Nova and Mystical Frost Nova. Then we're putting 3 points into Glass Cannon to deal more damage. Yes, we take a bit more damage, but it is worth it. Then 1 point into Elemental Attunement. Lucky hit, crits have up to a 5% chance to reset the cooldown of one of your defensive skills, can only happen once every 10 seconds. Won't trigger a whole lot, but when it does, it'll help. Sorcs are very cooldown dependent. In Conjuration skills, not taking any actives, but our passives, Precision Magic. 3 ranks there to increase our lucky hit chance. That'll help us trigger that Elemental Attunement more. 1 point in Align the Elements, that's going to give us some more damage reduction. 3 points in Mana Shield. Every time you spend 100 mana, you gain 21% damage reduction for 5 seconds. And then 3 points into Protection. Using a cooldown, which we're doing all the time, grants 30% of your max life as a barrier for 3 seconds. So this is all massive defensive synergies here to keep us alive. Then we get to Mastery skills. We're putting 5 ranks into Ball Lightning. A point into Enhanced Ball Lightning, and then Wizard's Ball Lightning. If an enemy is hit at least 4 times by a cast of Ball Lightning, a crackling energy is formed. It can only happen once per cast. We're going to be spawning a bunch of crackling energy. Because the balls are orbiting around us, it's really easy to hit enemies multiple times. 1 point into Static Discharge. On a lucky hit, crits with shock skills have a chance to form crackling energy, and then 3 points into Invigorating Conduit. Absorbing crackling energy makes you gain mana. This is our huge source of sustain for our resource. Then into Ultimate, we get Unstable Currents, Prime Unstable Currents, and then for the passives, 1 point into Permafrost. Frost skills deal 5% increased damage to elites. It's just a prerequisite for Hoarfrost. You watch your tongue. You deal 9% increased damage to chilled enemies and 18% increased damage to frozen enemies. Synergizes really well with our Frost Nova. 1 point into Coursing Currents. Hitting enemies with shock skills increases your crit strike chance by 1%, resets upon crit. We're hitting enemies all the time with shock skills. And then 3 points into Electrocution. Enemies deal 15% less damage for 5 seconds after being critically struck by your shock skills, so this should be up pretty much all the time, a nice little defensive buff. And for our key passive, we are taking Overflowing Energy. Crackling Energy hits 1 additional enemy. Each time Crackling Energy hits an enemy, your shock skill cooldowns are reduced by 0.1 second, increased to 0.25 seconds against elites. What is a shock skill? Our ultimate, Unstable Currents. What is a shock skill? Teleport. This will allow us to have so much more uptime on Unstable Currents and have teleport available to us much more often when we need it. Now, for our Sorcerer enchantment slots, we're going to put, first off, Ball Lightning. Cause yo dog, I heard you like Ball Lightning. The enchantment effect of Ball Lightning, on lucky hit, crit strikes have a 25% chance to spawn a static Ball Lightning. Oh, and what happens when we shoot Ball Lightning? Oh yeah, we get Crackling Energy, and when we get Crackling Energy, we get back more mana so that we can shoot more Ball Lightning. You see where I'm going with this? Now your second enchantment slot, we'll go over 2 options. The first is your ideal endgame scenario. That's going to mean you have access to a certain legendary node on your Paragon board and the Raiment of the Infinite chest armor. So let's look at the synergy. Raiment of the Infinite. After using teleport, close enemies are pulled to you and stunned for X number of seconds. Then on the Paragon board, the Static Surge node makes you gain 10 mana every time you stun close enemies. So if you put teleport into your enchantment slot, that replaces evade with a short range teleport on a 17-second cooldown, meaning you can teleport more often. And when you're teleporting, you're pulling enemies close to you and stunning them, and therefore you are stunning multiple close enemies and regaining a huge amount of mana. So if you don't yet have your Raiment of the Infinite, then instead of a teleport in the enchantment slot, you can put Arc Lash Enchantment. When you use a cooldown, enemies around you are stunned for half a second, and that'll instead trigger your Static Surge. Alright, now let's give an overview of the gear. Now again, to use this build, the only thing that you absolutely need is the gravitational aspect. Everything else we're going to go over simply enhances the build, but gravitational aspect is mandatory. Gravitational aspect makes Ball Lightning orbit around you. Prior to patch 1.1.1, it also reduced the damage of Ball Lightning. Now, it actually increases the damage of Ball Lightning, which is absolutely huge. You're going to put the gravitational aspect either on your weapon, your offhand, your gloves, or one of your rings. Next, you want the Retribution aspect. Distant enemies have a chance to be stunned when they hit you, and you deal increased damage to stunned enemies. Synergizes well with our stun setup. These will go either on weapon, offhand, gloves, or ring. Next, we want Conceited. You deal increased damage when you have a barrier active. Hey, we're a sorcerer. We always have barriers active. Again, weapon, offhand, gloves, or ring. Then lastly, Control. You deal more damage to immobilized, stunned, or frozen enemies. Hey, guess what? When enemies aren't stunned, they're frozen. Again, weapon, offhand, gloves, or ring. Next, you want the Frost Blitz aspect on your helm. Frost Nova gains an additional charge, but the cooldown per charge is increased. Still worth it. For your chest, your best in slot, as we said, is a Raiment of the Infinite, but before that, you can use Fortune. Your lucky hit chance is increased while you have a barrier active, i.e. all the time. For your pants, you want Disobedience. You gain increased armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage. It's really hard for sorcerers to build up armor. This is an important source. For boots, we want Ghostwalker. While you're unstoppable and for 4 seconds after, you gain increased move speed and can move freely through enemies. We have 2 ways of becoming unstoppable, teleport and flame shield, so we have good uptime on this. For amulet, we want Elementalist Aspect. Mastery skills cast at or above 100 mana gain a 40% increased crit strike chance. With the crit strike chance we're already stacking, this is pretty much guaranteed crits. And then on one of your rings, you need the Prodigy's Aspect. Using a cooldown restores mana. We're all about using our cooldowns. You might have some resource management issues before you get this, so you definitely want to make it a priority to go unlock this aspect in your codex. Alright, now as for exactly what you want on every piece of gear, for your weapon you want a wand. You're looking for high base damage, you're looking for vulnerable damage, crit strike damage, lightning crit strike damage, and intelligence. For your offhand, cooldown reduction. Such an important stat for us. Chance to gain resource on lucky hit, resource generation, and mana cost reduction. For our helm, cooldown reduction, max mana, lucky hit chance with barrier, and max life. For your chest, if you don't have the Raiment of the Infinite, you're looking for damage reduction against close enemies, damage reduction from distant enemies, damage reduction, and percent armor. On gloves, we're looking for attack speed, chance to gain resource on lucky hit, crit strike chance, and lightning crit strike damage. For your pants, you want the implicit stat that makes your potions grant barrier. You want plus ranks to Ball Lightning, damage reduction against close enemies, damage reduction against distant enemies, and flat damage reduction. For your boots, you want the implicit that gives plus to your max evade charges. That's particularly for when you have teleport in your enchantment slot. You want mana cost reduction, move speed, ranks to Frost Nova, ranks to teleport. For your amulet, cooldown reduction, mana cost reduction, ranks to all mastery skills, ranks to all defensive skills. Then for your rings, you want resource generation, vulnerable damage, and crit strike damage. And then on one ring, you want lightning crit strike damage, and on the other, you want critical strike chance. In your helm, chest, and pants, you want rubies for more max life. In your weapons, you want emeralds to deal more crit strike damage to vulnerable enemies. In your jewelry, if you're playing non-season, you want skulls for more armor. If you are running seasonal, then you're going to want Malignant hearts, which we'll cover later in this video. For Paragon, your number one priority is unlocking the second Paragon board, Static Surge, and getting the Static Surge legendary node. Again, stunning close enemies restores 10 mana. Otherwise, we just can't maintain mana. Along the way, you're going to pick up the glyph, and you'll start with the Adept glyph. For every 5 intelligence within range, mastery skills gain increased damage. And if you meet 40 out of 40 intelligence, then mastery skills have 20% increased area. So priority 1, reaching Static Surge. Priority 2 is getting that 40 out of 40 intelligence. I'm not going to go over every single Paragon point, you can find that in the max roll guide, but your next priority is to make it over to a third Paragon board. That's going to be Elemental Summoner. And you want to go grab the glyph. At this point, you're going to take that Adept glyph that you had been leveling up before and pop it into this one instead. And then you're going to put the Control glyph into your starter Paragon board. Control is for every 5 decks within range, you deal increased damage to crowd-controlled targets. And if you meet the 25 dex bonus, you deal 10% increased damage to slowed or chilled enemies, or instead, 20% increased damage to stunned or frozen enemies. And you're going to respec some of the points in your Paragon board in order to meet that requirement. Now, once you get a few more Paragon points from there, you're actually going to want to respec a good amount of your Paragon board to shift around the setup. You're going to now attach Elemental Summoner as your second board, and Static Surge as your third as follows, and you're going to build up more within Static Surge in order to get another glyph. Here you're going to insert Reinforced. This gives you 25% bonus damage to all rare nodes within range. And at 25 willpower, you gain 10% damage reduction while you have an active barrier, basically all the time. You're then going to build towards getting the Frigid Fate as your fourth Paragon board in order to get the Charged glyph. For every 5 intel, purchase within range, Crackling Energy deals more damage, doesn't matter, but picking up Crackling Energy, the additional bonus at 40 intelligence, grants you 5% increased damage for 5 seconds up to 15%. So that's basically just a 15% damage multiplier we'll always be able to have. Then eventually you get a 5th Paragon board, you'll get Burning Instinct and put in the Destruction glyph. For every 5 decks within range, you deal 2% increased crit strike damage, and at 25 dex, crit strikes increase all damage the enemy takes from you by 2% for 10 seconds up to 12%. So again, just another 12% flat multiplicative damage buff. And eventually you go for your 6th Paragon board, Searing Heat with the Exploit Glyph. For every 5 dex within range, you deal 1% increased damage to vulnerable targets, with the additional bonus at 25 dex being dealing damage to a vulnerable enemy increases your damage by 1% for 6 seconds up to 10%. Another 10% damage multiplier here. Alright, now lastly, if you're playing Season 1, you have access to Malignant Hearts. These are objects that you can put into your jewelry sockets. The best Malignant Hearts that you can get. Number 1, Caged Heart of the Barber. Critical strikes and all subsequent damage within 2 to 4 seconds is absorbed by your target. Then the absorbed damage erupts onto surrounding enemies. Stored damage is increased by 11% per second. This results in a huge damage bonus. This allows us to deal incredible amounts of area of effect damage. The next heart you'll want is the Caged Heart of Tempting Fate. You gain crit strike damage, but your non-crit strikes deal less damage. We have almost 100% crit strike chance, so this is basically just a pure damage bonus to us. And then you want the Caged Heart of Revenge. 20% of incoming damage is instead suppressed. When you use a defensive skill, all suppressed damage is amplified by 250% and explodes, dealing fire damage to nearby enemies. The damage dealt here is not important. We need this for the 20% suppressed damage. And that's going to wrap up this guide. As a reminder, folks, if you're looking to see what has changed with patch 1.1.1, we have this overview video over here. And stay tuned for updates on how this patch might have changed what the best builds are. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more Diablo content.